You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Hey, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. This podcast is sponsored by X-Deep. Thanks to the team at X-Deep for their ongoing support. Now, when I'm looking for guests for the show, I obviously want to be talking with highly skilled, experienced divers and instructors. I also look for those people who take sidemount diving to the corners of the earth, to challenging environments in support of exploration, science, and just the thrill of being out there on the water. In addition to those facets, I also want guests who have strong opinions on the way they dive, on safety, on dive execution, and on how we can all be better divers. So when I started to follow some of the Facebook posts and blog articles from Mexico-based cave diver, explorer, and instructor Roger Williams, I knew he would make a great guest on the show. His posts and articles are always informative, well written, and delivered with a good measure of humor, and so it was with our discussion in this episode. We talked about how Roger got into diving, cave diving, and instructing. We contrast the paths that you can take in diving, becoming an instructor or focusing on being a better diver through tech training. I get Roger's perspectives on sidemount and how he dives sidemount in the caves of the Yucatan Peninsula. And speaking of Yucatan, we share some on the importance of using local guides to build knowledge of a new area, and then we discuss the local line committee who make collective decisions on permanent lines and markers for the region. We finish by getting Roger's perspective on the Somos Los Cenotes initiative and the importance of conservation with respect to ongoing development in the Muyil region in particular. All this and much, much more in this episode of Speaking Sidemount. Roger, welcome to Speaking Sidemount.
Yeah, thanks for asking me to join you.
Oh, you're most welcome. Now, I've been following your super interesting posts on Facebook and some of your perspectives for a while, and I think there's so much for us to dig into, but can you start by giving us just a little bit of background on yourself and how you got into diving?
I was 16, 17 years old maybe, and my family took a vacation down to the Bahamas, tried the Discover Scuba Diving experience. And I said, oh, that seems like a cool way to kill a morning. And now, some years later, on reflection, I realized that they did an exceptionally good Discover Scuba program there. Personally, I was super pleased because I made my oxygen tank or whatever last for 20 whole minutes at 10 meters of ridiculously beat up reef. But it was just a lot of fun. Maybe 5 years after that, my family again went to Jamaica. Now 20 something years old. I was like, I wonder if they have that whole stick a regulator in your face thing. They did that again and just thought it was the coolest thing in the world. Cut to another couple of years later, I was going down to Mexico. I was going to Puerto Vallarta. I said, I wonder if they have the scuba thing. Wait, I'm not going for about 6 months. Maybe I can get my scuba license or whatever. And then when I get down to Mexico, I can just do the scuba, which is what I did. I went to a dive shop. I was living in Northern Virginia at the time. Wandered into a dive shop and got certified. Well, I did the pool work and the academics in Virginia, and I did my checkout dives in Mexico. On my second open water checkout dive, this was scuba dive number 2, working towards certification. I got horrible heat exhaustion and wound up throwing up through my regulator on my second dive ever. So yeah, naturally, I was just completely hooked.
It's nothing like, I love it. And so what happened after that?
After that, I went back to Virginia, and as a newly certified diver, I thought I'd go out to this rock quarry that everybody talked about as cold and murky and horrible. But I figured I could keep my skills fresh for the, once a year, maybe twice a year that I made my way down to the Caribbean. And what I had originally planned was go, maybe once every month or two. Except that turned into every Saturday. Then that turned into every Saturday and Sunday. All weekend, every weekend, all season. I started taking more and more classes. I basically recruited a coworker and friend of mine into getting his open water certification as well. So we started diving together a whole hell of a lot. I started going more into the technical route. He started going more of the instructor route. And yeah, then again, cut to a decade after that, and we're both working in the dive industry full time. We've both left our shared career behind.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and I hear that a lot where people get into diving and then all of a sudden it becomes a passion, and then the passion becomes a career. And I read in one of your blog posts, you made an interesting comment in there about the two routes you can take, whether you decide to take a route where you become a better diver versus the dive master route where you want to become part of a professional group, if you like. And I think your perspective on that was really interesting. So why did you originally choose not to go down the dive master route?
I was more interested in becoming a better diver. The first technical course that I taught, I was kind of conned into going for a cavern course in North Florida. And I came back from that with a very different perspective on what dive skills are, can, and arguably should be. And had a conversation with the gentleman who was my cavern instructor about whether I should pursue cave diving. This was still living in Virginia, so wreck diving was really not available easily to me. So whether I should continue to pursue becoming a cave diver or whether I should start following the dive master route. And I suppose I was very lucky that his advice is kind of the same advice that I've now taken to giving a lot of people, which is if you want your skills to be more refined, take more challenging classes, take a technical course, take something that's really going to be demanding of your abilities as a diver. To become a dive master, become an instructor, that's another set of skills that needs to be refined and worked on and honed and presents its own challenges. But they're really the challenges of conveying information versus being able to execute certain skills. I think that there's kind of a misconception that, the dive masters and the instructors, like, oh, well, they're the best divers.
Yes.
They're not necessarily. Many of them are exceptionally good divers, but it's not the same skill set. And I really meditated on that for a while and realized that I didn't really have a calling to be an instructor. I wanted to be a better diver. After that conversation, I stewed about it for probably 2 or 3 weeks before I took what money and time off I had at the time and started looking more towards being a cave diver instead of being a dive master.
Yeah, I so much resonate with that because it's weird for me. I became a dive master not really knowing what tech diving was. And I went down that route because I wanted to be a better diver. I thought the only path to that was going through the kind of typical PADI program and ending up as a dive master. And it was only when I was a dive master that I actually saw some video. I've said this a few times before. I saw Steve Bogart's video in Sidemount and then some of Steve Martin's material. And I thought, wow, that is a skill set I've actually never even seen before, let alone experience. And I thought, wow, that's the skill set that I want. So I was actually a dive master when I went for cave training. And you just become so much better as a diver when you go through a technical diving course. And I think ultimately you're a better instructor as well. And one of the things I've seen here in New Zealand with a lot of my colleagues is there's a few guys who are becoming instructors later in their diving life, if you like, because what they're doing is they're becoming tech divers first, acquiring a significant skill set, and then becoming an instructor after that. And so they're bringing to recreational dive instruction this higher skill set. And you've got to be careful because you don't want to enforce a tech diving skill set on newbie divers, but at the same time, if they can see superior buoyancy and trim and balance and stability in the water as a new diver, then they realize what they should be doing. And I think it's a good thing.
No, it's absolutely true. As I said, I think it's a bit of a disservice within the industry that the dive mastering, the instructoring has really been sold as, now you really know what you're doing. As you were saying, I think it's much more valuable for somebody to take something like a GUE fundamentals course, something like a TDI intro to tech course, an IANTD essentials course, something by an instructor who can really show you basically just how to hold still in the water. Because I feel like being able to hold still in the water is an extremely undervalued skill. And I think it actually is a skill.
Yes.
Because in the recreational world, there's a lot of, you swim around. That's the point of diving, right? Is to get from here to over there to see the cool thing, and then you have to come back. Versus just being able to hover motionless and look at a nudibranch or, whatever you have.
Yeah.
So yeah, as people transition from the recreational world into the technical world, you see them falling back on these very, very recreational skills that have been instilled in them by dive masters or instructors or mentors that may not have the just hover and hold still skill nailed down themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know how many times I've talked about that personally, and then I've had guys like Gary Dallas and who else has been, Thomas Mishura, everyone that I've spoken to, Natalie Gibb, I remember talking to her about that as well, just the importance of being still. And what it really means is that you're 100% in control of your body and your equipment while you're in the water. If you want to be still, you're still. If you want to move in one direction or another, be that forwards, backwards, sideways, whatever, you can do that. And of course, it becomes mega important when you're in an overhead environment and you're around delicate formations or you're in a shipwreck, and it's important that you don't necessarily touch something you don't want to touch or disrupt the visibility both in cave or wreck. So yeah, I just don't think it gets emphasized enough at the recreational level.
What I also find is that it seems completely obvious, but it's not obvious enough that it's something that a lot of people come into at the technical training level with by default. But when you can hold still, everything else is a lot easier.
Oh yeah.
Like any other skill, any other scenario, any other failure that either an instructor can hit you with or that you actually encounter in the real world, just holding still is your natural state of existence, then everything else becomes so much more easily managed.
Yeah, agreed.
Versus people who, constant hand fitting or, just slightly bad trim makes such a huge difference. I find a lot of that amplified in Sidemount, where I feel like everything is a little more squirrely, or can be a little more squirrely.
Yep. Yeah, and we'll get onto that in a moment because I do want to talk to you about Sidemount. One thing I do find with that stability thing is that there's two levels of it as well. The first one is, can you be still and stable when you want to be? And of course, when your conscious mind is focusing on it, a lot of people can accomplish that as they start to develop that skill. Eventually you get there, right? You can be still. And then the second level of that is now continue to be still while you accomplish a skill. And then you quite often find it starts to fall apart as soon as the conscious mind is off trying to deal with some piece of equipment or something else, then all of a sudden that's lost again, right? So I think number one, you accomplish the first level, can you be still? And then the second level is, can you remain and hold a level, or can you remain in that position while you do something else? Yeah.
And I think a lot of that is accomplishing that first level to a point where it just becomes your default. It's just what your body falls into. One of the challenges I find I face, usually kind of early on in classes especially, is, okay, somebody has practiced a whole bunch in the quarry, or maybe they're lucky enough that they have a pool nearby and they've practiced holding still really, really well, and they can do that. And then, I'll swim up and hit you with a bubble gun or something, and they default instantly into their recreational, like, I need to communicate with my buddy. I go vertical, turn around, and horizontally. Like, see, and I'm holding still again. Yeah.
Yeah, but your fins just hit the bottom and now you've messed up the viz. Exactly.
That's when blackout has come out.
Another level again, perhaps. Now you're starting to not only accomplish a skill, but now you're losing some of your senses along the way as well. Right?
Yeah. Which again, I think it goes back to just holding perfectly still in the water as a skill that you need to just force into your body as complete muscle memory, so that when you've had a failure or you've had a loss of visibility or whatever you might be faced with, you don't need to think about holding still, because your body just takes care of that somewhere in some subroutine that you don't really need to pay attention to.
Yeah, so it's subconscious, right? Awesome. So you went down the tech diving route and chose not to go down the instruction route, and yet here you are as a full cave instructor. And so how did that happen?
Well, I had tried to make the transition from cavern diver to intro or basic, whatever it was. But I kept getting rained out in Florida. My class kept getting postponed. During that time, I also moved up to New Jersey, where I'm originally from, the East Coast, right outside New York City. And there's a large wreck diving community there. So
I was about to say, how are you not a wreck diver?
And I started falling in with that crowd. Started hanging out on dive boats a whole lot. There's a lot of trash talking on dive boats. That's a skill that isn't in any of the technical manuals, being able to keep up with the shit talking. But I fell in love. and I became a Northeast direct diver, was for some years. But while I was doing that, the shop that I was kind of diving through, the fella that owned the shop just kind of needed a hand doing this, needed a hand doing that from time to time. And without even really noticing it, I started becoming a dive master. And I said, all right, well, let's formalize it. I'll become a dive master. And as I started looking around at some of the instruction and frankly, some of the diving that I saw around, it's like, well, I can do better. I can make better divers than that. And again, without noticing it happen, the vocation actually vocalized itself to me. So yeah, now here I am, qualified as a technical diver, finally deciding to be a recreational instructor. But I was never going to be a technical instructor because that was just going to be for me. Spend enough time on boats, and I started looking around. I was like, I think I could do better than this. Then I started working towards becoming a technical instructor. And for years after that, I had a lot of friends who were like, well, you really love cave diving. I finally did get certified as a cave diver. You should be a cave instructor. And then I said, no, I'm never going to be a cave instructor. Partially because I wanted to reserve that just for me. Mm-hmm. And the other part of that was I didn't live in cave country. Mm-hmm. So I would use most of my vacations to go cave diving. But during each of those vacations, the first day or two would be shakedown.
Yep.
And I just never felt that it would be fair to a student to say, oh, sure, I'll teach you how to cave dive. The first 2 days are going to be a little rough while I shake down myself, though. So that actually didn't happen until I actually moved down to cave country in Florida and kind of finally started to pursue becoming a cave instructor. Mm-hmm. And again, that came from, I think I can do better. And unfortunately, we've all seen divers around that their pre-dive checks are lacking. Their skills are a little wonky. Their control in the water could be improved. Yeah. And as I see that around me, I start getting edgy about it. Yeah. And I feel like, it's an environment that deserves the very best, both as stewards of the cave and just, there's a certain cachet to being a cave diver. And it sounds poncy to say so, but it's true.
Yep. Yep.
I feel like that cachet should be deserved. Yep. Instead of just like, yeah, that'll do. Like, no, that'll do is not enough.
Yeah, good enough is not enough, right? You have to be at the level. I can resonate a lot with that, and I find a lot, there's just this perspective where, good enough is good enough, and provided I don't kill myself, I'm okay. And I think I read in one of yours, it's one of the overall tenets of diving is don't kill yourself, don't kill anyone else, and don't embarrass your instructor, but which I love. But at
that
the
was
same...
actually the fella that I talked into doing his open water instruction when we were working together. That's one of his.
And it's very cool. But at the same time, you can be a lot better than that. And I've always been a person, both in my business and all my careers, where I've aspired to excellence. So I've always looked around for excellence and used those sort of people as role models to copy and to be better. And I think that's where, if I can espouse anything personally, is that aspire to excellence, aspire to be better, be like a lot of sports people are. We just lost Kobe Bryant this weekend, which is just so tragic. There's an example of somebody who aspired to excellence. And why wouldn't you do that if you can?
Everybody can be better, no matter how good you are. There is somebody in this world that is better than you in some way.
Yeah.
Find that person, talk to them, learn from them, try and incorporate what they might have.
Yeah.
Maybe it's bollocks. Maybe you can learn what not to do from some people.
Sure.
But yeah, as you say, there's always live aspirationally that you can be a little better tomorrow than you were today.
Yeah, and use every dive as a training dive, right? You don't want to take the fun out of it, but you should always say, hey, on the last dive, I wasn't too good at this. Next dive, I want to be better at that. What can I do to improve? And just, even if it's buoyancy trim, balance stability, managing whatever you need to do, managing equipment, getting in the water, getting out of the water, whatever it might be, there's always something you can be a little better at. So let's delve into some of the things that you talk about in your blog. And I think if there's an overarching theme to what I've read in there, it's very much around what you just talked about, aspiring to excellence and being better. But there's also a really strong safety side to it as well, I think. And one of the things you talked about in Mexico, it applies everywhere else, is using local guides when you go to a new area. So let's talk that through first. What issues do you see with divers coming to the area, and how can they be solved?
That's a tricky one, isn't it?
Mm.
Divers from around the world are used to mostly sort of spring-style caves, where for the most part there's a single entrance. Maybe there are a couple offset sinks in the system, but there's usually kind of a primary entrance and exit, and you've got a passage with some offshoots that you can explore. Given the geology of the Yucatan Peninsula, that's not what's here. This is a sponge full of Swiss cheese, full of barely flowing water. Right? Mm-hmm. Because of that, there are sinkholes everywhere. I mean, you can hardly spit without hitting a cenote somewhere. Mm-hmm. And frequently from those cenotes, there are several lines, some of them upstream, some of them downstream. Sometimes there will be 3 lines. There's kind of the primary upstream line, the primary downstream line, and then that little line that goes to a silty little shithole over there where nobody belongs. When you're not familiar with the area, when you're not familiar with the sites, and you go hunting around with your 400-foot reel, and somebody told you, like, yeah, it's under the choking fig tree, just head kind of north. Okay, you kind of head north, and you wind up in the little silty line where nobody belongs. Not knowing that, you carry on. Navigation around here can be insanely complex. I mean, it's just branch works upon branch works upon branch works. So you wind up with people who, was it the 3rd arrow or the 4th arrow that we're supposed to jump to the left? I'm pretty sure it's the 3rd arrow. And you follow that jump, and again, you wind up somewhere you really don't belong.
Right.
I've done a couple of dives that I find a lot of fun with a really dear friend of mine, where the both of us will be on rebreathers with way more bailout than we need, scooters and tow scooters, and we'll just go to the back of a system and basically almost deliberately get lost. Mm-hmm. Like, we're just going to take every jump that's an hour back. And we swim around in circles, and we double back on ourselves, and we're like, oh, look, there's our scooters. Mm-hmm. Let's go back and get them from the other side again. We're very familiar with these caves now. When you're not very familiar with these caves, it's a real easy way to get yourself into a lot of trouble very, very quickly. Mm. And that frightens me. It frightens me on the behalf of people who are, they're here for a nice vacation.
Yeah.
Something Gareth Locke talks about an awful lot is nobody wakes up in the morning and says, you know what, I'm going to go make a fatal mistake today. Mm. No one does that. Mm. You always think that you're making perfectly well-informed decisions. And sometimes you turn around and you look at the chain of events that you've caused, and it's just wreckage behind you. Mm-hmm. And hopefully you're in a position where you can recover from that. Unfortunately, in this sport, that is not always the case. And then we run into the issue of secondary victims, and somebody's now got to go get you.
Yeah,
it turns very tragic.
There's no fun there at all. There's no fun for the diver, for the families of the diver, for the local community, for the cave rescue recovery, people who have to go and bring somebody out, for the landowner.
And for the image of the sport overall.
Sure.
Cave diving is already viewed as, it's such an extreme sport. Like, well, there is additional risk, but that risk can be mitigated.
Yes.
When somebody makes a series of poor decisions, suddenly it looks like an extreme sport again.
Yeah, I have a bit of a saying, it's a lot of fun until it's not. And I think you've got to go in with a decent amount of respect and almost, I don't want to call it fear, but it almost is the right word. I know myself personally because I'm full cave qualified, advanced cave with the CDAA in Australia as well. And yet I don't do enough cave diving. So I'm not cave diving every week, every month. I am every year for sure. So I'm extremely cautious when I go anywhere. I always go with a guide. I always do a series of super simple dives, pretty much just following the permanent line for a period, looking at a few jumps, turning around, coming back, maybe do one jump. That's it, and then you start to build yourself up. And if you're fortunate enough to be there for a week or 2 weeks or something, then you can start to go a little further. But I've done a lot of diving, so it's not that I couldn't do more, but it's just you just have to be that cautious because, as I said, it's a lot of fun till it's not. I always go with a guide because, again, even if I say, hey, listen, I'm just going to follow the permanent line and I'm going to just do one jump, well, yeah, I mean, I'll put my hand up. I've missed a T before, swam straight past it. So it only takes one mistake like that when you're not with a guide for things to go really pear-shaped for you.
Or at the very least with a qualified and capable team.
Yes.
It caused a holy hellstorm when, the first time I posted something about always hire a guide. And I think a lot of people interpreted that or took that to mean that you must have a guide with you holding your hand at all times, which is really not what I meant. I myself, I've been coming down to Mexico for 14 years, I think. And for the first couple of times, which were spaced a year or two apart, I dove with a group, with a local guide. After the fifth or sixth time I came down here, I think, there were a few systems that I knew. And I felt comfortable enough diving with Nellie, my wife. Well, let's go to those caves that we know and that we've visited a couple of times already. But, let's hire a guide for a few days to show us some places that we don't know. Instead of just, buying a map at a dive shop and looking up directions on the internet, I wanted somebody to show me. Where's the cave? What does the landowner expect? How do you enter and exit? Simple topside stuff. Landowner relations stuff. In addition to, where is the main line? What's the cool stuff to see?
Yep.
And now, kind of those caves were added to our repertoire. And we did that, 4 or 5 times of coming down here and having a local guide show us some places. And eventually, obviously, if you're visiting a place enough, no, you don't need the guide. Eventually, you are the guide.
Sure.
And that's sort of inevitable. So I don't mean that you need to have somebody hand-holding you, but there are also circumstances that are kind of highly changeable in this area because all of the caves are privately owned. And the rules of access to caves can change from week to week. And if you come from out of town, you go to a cave that ostensibly is closed. The landowner doesn't want diving there, but he kind of looks the other way. And then you go all over, Facebook talking about how you went there. Well, now you're bringing attention to something that nobody wants attention. And without any malicious intent, you didn't know. You don't know the local politics. You don't know the local mores, which I think is another real value to having somebody local showing you these things. Even as a full cave diving instructor, as an experienced diver in Florida and Mexico, I'm not going to go to France and just roll up on a cave and go diving. I want somebody who's been diving those caves to show me, what do I do here? I don't know how things work here.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the things you pointed out there is the access to caves is not a God-given right, is it? We have to manage the relationships with landowners and sometimes local authorities as well. And we have to be very careful about the way we conduct ourselves to make sure we preserve that. Certainly the CDA in Australia, that's what they're all about. It's all about landowner relations and preserving access to caves. And they're very, very vigorous, to say the least, about anything that could compromise that. And I see a little bit of that in Mexico, although it's less organized. Talk a little bit about the line committee in your area as well, because that's, I think, a relatively new thing that seems to be really interesting.
In geologic time, certainly. It's a very new thing. It's something I'm really excited to be a part of. Again, because it's such a spider web down here, it can be difficult to kind of agree on how do we line these passages? What is going to be the safest way to approach lining and marking caves? Most anybody with kind of even a passing familiarity with the history of cave diving in Mexico will have heard about kind of the great line wars of 90s mostly, really. And people changing arrows while other divers are in the cave and changing lines around. All sorts of really horrible horror stories. Well, it doesn't do, does it? It doesn't do to just scream at each other and everybody have some sort of contradictory opinion about the safest way to do something. Obviously, if you get 3 different cave divers in a room and ask for an opinion, you're going to get 8 different opinions. What the line committee was established to do is try and most conveniently put together the group of people that has the best perspective, or perhaps most informed perspective, on the safest way to approach some of these issues. Something like, how do we run a cavern line in X, Y, or Z cave? Well, let's talk about that. Well, it's not that easy with conflicting schedules. Get everybody into a room together. Or perhaps you can get a huge majority of people into the room together, but maybe the 2 guys who have been here longest Well, they couldn't make time in their schedule that night. So two people who may have had a very valuable perspective can't participate. So the line committee was actually established virtually.
Mm-hmm.
It's run through Facebook and through SurveyMonkey. What we do is a set of moderators. There are 6 moderators. Pretty sure there are 6 moderators who don't have a stronger vote than anybody. They're there to kind of decide, okay, what are we going to discuss? And let's everybody keep it civil while we discuss this issue. So they'll kind of bring something to the table. Everybody in the area has the right to voice their opinion on what's going to be the best way to do this. The moderators will frequently propose, okay, well, here's a set of solutions. These are kind of the best solutions that have been proposed so far. How do we feel about voting on these solutions? And assuming nobody completely loses their mind on Facebook, it then goes to a vote. Most of those votes require a 2/3 majority, and the voting requirements and such are, I don't want to get too deeply into the weeds on that. But when a 2/3 majority is reached, okay, well, now that change can be implemented in the cavern line of X, Y, or Z cave, or if we're going to reline this passage, or shall we or shan't we standardize line marking, those sorts of things. I think it's a really valuable and important way to kind of get the community on the same page about these things and try and prevent something like having line wars reignite.
No, it sounds to me to be entirely sensible and a very, very well thought through way of making things happen, right? And I guess the tacit thing that you have to agree to in going into this is, number one, once the committee decides on something, even if you happen to disagree with it, you go along with that. And then secondly, you don't change your line, right? Or don't change your markers.
There have been a couple of things so far that, I've disagreed with the outcome of the vote. That's too bad, isn't it? Because that's what common consensus has been. That is now the local moray.
Yeah.
I'm comfortable following the local rules now.
Yeah, and you had your chance to voice your opinion, right? And I guess provided that it's considered and then for some reason it goes in a different direction, you just have to suck that up for the greater good, don't you?
Well, and the other thing about that is one needs to have the humility to recognize that, I've got my opinion. I might not be right.
Yeah.
Maybe the common consensus isn't right, but it is the common consensus. And now being the common consensus, that is what we will be doing. Unless anything is just patently unsafe and nothing that the line committee has proposed, debated, decided, implemented has been patently unsafe. It's all been progressive and I think all pointed in the right direction. Again, even if I've disagreed with it, it's minutia. Exactly. I think it might be a little safer if we do it this way. Everybody else disagrees. Okay, well, we'll do it that way.
Yeah, and you'd have to consider the one thing you can guarantee is within the committee there's enough experience and skills and knowledge that it's almost impossible to get it 100% wrong, right? Or to get it to a state where it's going to be patently wrong.
Exactly. I mean, among the line committee, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of hours of cave, if not millions of hours cave diving. There is a lot of experience on the line committee. A lot of people who I really respect.
Do you think it's taken a step forward in helping the community come together as well? I mean, I know within any community there's always going to be sort of those that get on and those that don't. Do you think it's had a positive impact in that respect?
I do. I really do. I think it's at the very least demonstrated that we can come together as a community. And again, let's kind of set our egos aside. Okay, you've had your opportunity to voice your opinion. You've been outvoted. And for the most part, what I've seen among the community is, a little bit of maybe private grumbling, but everybody is a little more cohesive.
Yep.
And I think demonstrating, hey, we can come together as a community, it gives everybody the opportunity to be like, well, why didn't we just do that before?
Mm-hmm. Very cool.
And I hope that it's an indicator of good things to come.
Great. So this is Speaking Sidemount, and we've talked a lot about your background, and obviously we're in cave diving country, and Sidemount will be very prevalent where you are, but we've sort of started out with you beginning as a northeast diver, which is obviously a backmount type of configuration area. So how did you come to Sidemount diving, and how does Sidemount diving fit within your current diving?
I look at it as a tool. I came to Sidemount diving out of necessity more than anything. I would get to passages that I just could not either comfortably fit through in back mount or where I would cause damage trying to go through on back mount. And when you hit that point, well, it's time to turn around. I won't fit through there, which is why I started exploring side mount as a configuration. It took a lot of tinkering. It took a lot of fussing and, well, let me try this harness. Let me try that harness. I'm 6'6". What is that? It's,
2 meters.
I'm tall. So finding a side mount harness that fits me in a way that I'm comfortable with and that I trim out in a way that I'm happy, that was a challenge. But then kind of dialing everything in, finding exactly the right way everything belongs. One day I had a dive where you can just, hey, this is pretty cool. And now I did have the opportunity to go into some of those smaller passages, some of the flatter, wider, or even tank-offier type areas, which have proven to be absolutely beautiful. I'm not the sort of side mount diver that gets really excited about just wiggling through teeny tiny little passage for ages and ages. I like looking at pretty stuff. If I have to wiggle, if I have to take gear off to get through to where the pretty stuff is, I'm perfectly happy, and I enjoy the technical challenge of that. But an hour of moving through passage where I have, one tank Superman in front of me the entire time, I just find horribly tedious. So I side mount dive. I am on back mount probably the majority of the time, but I'll dive side mount at least once or twice a week.
Yeah.
If I notice I've just been on back mount for a solid week, okay, well, I'm diving side mount today because I don't want that skill set to even get a spot of rust.
Yeah.
Because it is a slightly different skill set and it needs to be kind of finely honed in its own right.
Yeah, interesting. And you side mount trained in Mexico?
More Florida. I have to admit, I never did any side mount training specifically in Mexico. I kind of took side mount training from Florida and kind of refined it to what it needs to be here and how it best suited me here.
Yeah.
That said, I think side mount training in Mexico is potentially a lot more challenging. There's just a lot more. It's unfair to say there's a lot more side mount cave in Mexico, but there's a lot more easily accessible side mount cave in Mexico.
Sure.
If that makes any sense.
Yeah. And I guess you would have had to go through the training with steel cylinders in Florida and then coming to Mexico and diving aluminum or aluminium cylinders and making that adjustment. It's
not a significantly different skill set, but it's a different skill set. Diving in Florida and diving in Mexico are almost different sports. There are a lot of considerations here that aren't applicable in Florida and vice versa. This goes back to one of the things we were talking about earlier about having a local guide, mentor, somebody to show you, well, how is the sport a little different and what do you need to pay more attention to here or there?
Yeah.
So when I came down here and I started diving side mount, I did so very conservatively for a very long time. Now I'm actually much more comfortable in my Mexican side mount rig than I am in my Floridian side mount rig.
Yeah, because I talk about this a lot, this whole perspective of where does side mount sit in the realm of configurations. And just to share my perspective, if you haven't heard it before, to help our conversation, is I started the other way around to you. So whereas you started as a back mount diver, northeast, wreck diving, I started as a side mount diver. That's where my technical diving began. So I have always been a side mount diver, and that is my preferred configuration. I've done so little back mount twin set diving that next to zero, a couple. So I take side mount everywhere. And for me to go from Florida to Mexico, equipment wise, is just like another day in the office, right? So it's a negligible change for me to go from steels to aluminium, dry suit to wetsuit, warm water, cold water, doesn't matter. But that's because I've emphasized this configuration as my preferred configuration. So in New Zealand here, for instance, we dive saltwater a lot, almost always steels, almost always dry suit. If we go to the tropics, it changes to wetsuit aluminium. I was just in Florida training and diving with Ed Sorensen, went back to freshwater, steel, but still dry suit. So all of these little changes can be incredibly difficult and fiddly, but when you've done them enough and that is your thing, then all of a sudden it's not such a problem anymore. And I think who was it that I was talking to? It might have been Natalie again, emphasized the fact that when you do a course, it's really important not to just focus on what you're diving in that location. If you happen to train in aluminium, don't forget that somewhere in the world you probably are going to need to dive steel if you want to dive side mount. Or you go the other way and say, hey, I need to train in the two configurations. I need to be side mount and back mount. Then what's important is what you just said. It's important to dive both configurations a lot. So if you are primarily side mount and then say, hey, shit, I need a twin set for this, then man, you better build your twin set skills and make sure you can do your valve drills and make sure that you can manage that equipment both in and out of the water and vice versa. And that's something I see as a bit of a trap. I am critical of people who, let's put it this way, who are, let's say, back mount divers who dive side mount occasionally and say, hey, it's a tool. And then I say, well, yeah, it is, but make sure those skills are refined, because if you're using it once in a while, then, as you said, rust forms and you don't have the skill set you thought you had.
That's actually one thing that I have to check myself from time to time when I get into kind of this very conversation, where people start talking about like, well, one of my big bugaboos is side mount off of a boat, which I think is kind of goofy, Frank. I'm in the enviable position of diving very nearly every day of my life. So it's very easy for me to start changing configuration, side mount, back mount, rebreather, kind of hop around just in kind of the will of the wind of the day. If somebody is only diving once a week, once every 2 weeks, they're only diving when they go away on vacation, then yeah, it kind of is essential that you are always diving the same configuration, whether it's side mount on a boat or not. If that is your preferred configuration, and that's where your muscle memory is trained for, okay, that makes perfect sense.
I do it every week. So for instance, here, I'm diving side mount off a boat. That would be 95% of my diving. So what you have to do in that circumstance is, like, for me to go to back mount off a boat would be a disaster, right? It would be, so I would have to go and build that skill set. And so for me, side mount on a boat is next to zero of a problem until, okay, now we have to do a decompression dive and we're carrying deco cylinders as well. And then probably the first to admit that diving 3 cylinders off a boat, 4 cylinders off a boat is a challenge. Yeah, it's not that easy for the back mount guys either, to be brutally honest, but it's still, it's more challenging. Yeah, and that's where now diving the Sidewinder, now I'm still 2 cylinders. I've only got the Sidewinder on me as well. And so I'm back into my comfort zone diving off a boat with that, but still some new things to figure out. So it's just about building skill sets,
But again, if you have the practice
yes,
with those tools, then okay, maybe it's challenging, but it's not an insurmountable challenge. It's about familiarity. And if you're familiar with the tool, have fun.
Yeah. And that's a good way to put it too. I often say, sometimes people are doing things that I don't think's right, but you got to let people do what they want to do, provided they're safe, right? So, hey, I'm looking at your background there, and you're sitting on this beautiful looking, what is it, terrace with little porticos there and plants and gardens. So this is Shokha. It's your property. Tell us a bit about Shokha.
Well, it's a little bed and breakfast. We just have 2 little guest houses, catered not exclusively to, but obviously with a heavy leaning towards cave divers. Because, we're in Mexican cave country here. Inside of 5 kilometers, we have as many commonly dived cenotes, easily accessible cenotes. So primarily what I work with is cave divers, either guiding or cave training. It's somewhere between a passion project and Nellie and I we lived in New York for a little while. And due to a variety of circumstances, we decided it was time to leave New York. We were actually going to head down to Australia. Nellie's family's in Australia, and that was kind of our final destination to go be around Nellie's family. That plan changed as well, and we decided, all right, well, if we're not going to go all the way to Australia, where do we want to wind up eventually? Well, we wanted to wind up in Mexico. Why don't we just do that now then? If we're leaving the city, we're not going to go to Australia, why don't we just go to where we wanted to be our final destination anyway? So we figured on coming down here, and I figured we'd rent a place, and I'd teach cave diving, and we'd hunt around and hopefully maybe find some rental property at some point. Nellie loves kind of entertaining. She loves making people feel at home. She loves to cook, especially for people, usually far too much food for people. And again, it was just kind of the stars aligned in such a way that we found a property that fit kind of absolutely every one of the things that we were hoping that like one day we would find our way to. And we figured, well, hell with it. It's kismet. We might as well just jump at the opportunity. Did. And so far it's been working out. So far, Nellie's gotten to cook for everybody in the world. And I've been really enjoying showing people Mexican caves. So yeah, passion project plus kind of, it's just where life led us.
Brilliant. Now, I love the alignment between you and your wife as partners, both for diving and also in running the business. We do a similar thing here with my wife. We have a coffee shop and gelato shop with some accommodation here. What I haven't quite figured out is how to attach the diving to it yet. And so you're teaching cave and cabin diving there. What else do you teach?
I'm an instructor up through Trimix, advanced nitrox, deco, and all those sorts of things. I'm a rebreather instructor on the ISC Megalodon. So just kind of whatever people are into and excited about. I confess that I do not go into the ocean anywhere near as often as I feel kind of a moral obligation to. That's one of the things every week I say, we have the Mesoamerican Reef is a kilometer away from my house.
And Cozumel's kind of close too, right?
I've seen it only a handful of times. I'd say, my focus is primarily on overhead training.
Isn't it funny how it's almost like I'll have to wash my dive gear if I go in salt water? So
yeah, it's disgusting. Absolutely.
Well, you could just, here's a plan, go for a saltwater dive and then go and head into a cenote somewhere and enjoy one of those dives.
Yeah, rinse everything off.
Yeah, exactly.
I had a dive a couple of years ago, something of a leap in logic, but getting back from a northeast wreck dive, we get back to dock, there are hoses all over the dock, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm like, this is great. I can rinse my rebreather here instead of having to bring it to my second story walk up and rinse it in the bathtub. So I'm standing on the dock, rinsing my rebreather. One of the mates is watching me for about 5 minutes. And I said, yeah, it's a saltwater hose, right? God damn it.
Still, you got some of the seaweed off at least, huh?
I suppose, yeah.
Very, very cool. So you've got your accommodation and you're doing dive training. What sort of diving do you do for fun?
Long. I am kind of a one and done kind of a diver these days. Yeah, I remember traveling down here for year after year and need to get in as much diving as you possibly can because we're only here for a week or we're here for 10 days. So we go for a dive, get out of the water, have to go get fills, come back because we're in just our dumb little sedan and it only fits 4 tanks in the back. Nowadays, I'd rather just get in the water in the morning and do a dive so that when I come out of the water, I can take off my dry suit and I can come home and have a sandwich. But I feel like if I am going to get in the water, I might as well make that count. So 3, 4, 5, 6 hour dives. That's kind of my happy place. I find, I don't know quite how to introduce this. Almost everybody has kind of a mental block. People like to talk about like, I like doing really, really long dives. Yeah, you think so. But I actually ask people, what has been your longest dive to date before we try and do a 5-hour dive? Because frequently people will they hit a point where they stop paying attention. They're not paying attention to their gas anymore. They're not monitoring their computer. Their kick will actually change. They don't pay attention to lights. It becomes hard to really be a safe diver after a certain point.
Sure.
For me personally, that's at about 3 hours, I hit sort of a wall and I have to tell my dive buddies like, okay, we need to stop for a second and I just need to float for a minute. Remind like I'm still scuba diving. And then usually as soon as I pass through that, all is well indefinitely.
Funnily enough, I developed a very similar habit while I was working as a teaching instructor and guide in Gozo, where they kind of have a rule, 1 deco dive a day, and that's all you're allowed to do for safety reasons, which I think is fantastic. But I found myself there just really enjoying doing one really big dive, and whether that's a really big dive because of the requirements of the dive in terms of depth and so on, or its depth and duration. And I just love that. I think, number one, it's good for the mind and soul from the perspective that you just focus on that one dive. But also, it actually just makes it quite a cool day. You kind of you're more relaxed getting set up. There's no rush. You don't have to think about, I have to start this dive now because I need a surface interval and then I need to do my second dive and we have to be finished by this time. So you're super relaxed in the morning, which means you're less likely to make mistakes and everything is nicer. You're super relaxed during your dive because you know at the end of this one, that's it. And then when you're finished, you will go off and have a pastésie or something, and then we're back to the dive center. You're leisurely washing your gear, and then you're off for a beer, and it's dinner time. It's a much better day, I think.
Absolutely. Well, and the other thing that I really savor, the reason that Nellie and I kind of wanted to be here in the first place, one of the many reasons we wanted to be here in the first place, is the geology here is so cool and so diverse that when you're in the water for kind of extended durations, you can really see the changing personality of even a single cave. So you can spend, hour 1 is all very small, very wiggly passage. Hour 2 is just power cave. Hour 3 is insanely tiny decorations, because now you're getting into that area where most people aren't going to swim in one direction for 3 hours straight.
Sure.
So you start finding these, untouched, pristine, pretty delicate little formations all over the place. And then you get all of that in reverse again. So you get a real variability of what the geology and the biology of this area have created. And I can geek out about that for probably far longer than most people can stay awake.
Yeah, and I had a similar thing in Sardinia. I was there recently last year, and you access the caves from the sea there, which is quite different. So you jump off a boat, and then you go through very, very thick halocline. And in some of them, you've also got a really thick hydrogen sulfide layer. And so the vis is not that great coming from in the ocean. It's wonderful, 30 meters plus. Then as you enter the cave, the visibility drops dramatically. And so you've got a bit of a challenge through there, but it's actually super nice, like even enjoying that. And then once you start to come half an hour to an hour into the cave, everything becomes, you're starting to see the formations, massive flow stones and so on. And then further in is where you start to see all the very delicate formations. And I just found that super enjoyable. And we knocked out a couple of stage open circuit dives in there. They were 2.5, 3 hours. And I thought were just magnificent dives. Same thing in Florida. That was more on the rebreather, but again, 3.5 hour dives into Jackson Blue and Hole in the Wall, and just the things you see further in the cave was just brilliant. So really enjoyed that.
And some of those things that you see, I mean, you can just float there and stare. And really, like, to your dive buddy, it's like, do you believe this thing?
Yeah. And you've got to do that, haven't you? You've got to stop and smell the roses or see what's there, don't you? To make sure that it's easy to get so focused on, I guess, the dive execution and planning that you forget to look at what you're seeing in there as well. And both are important.
An interesting thing happened the first couple of times that Nellie and I would come down here. And we'd swimming with a guide or a friend or whoever is showing us these caves. And they're really going. Like they're swimming hell-bent for leather. And during our surface interval, I'd have to say, like, look, I know you know this cave really well. I know that you've got certain kind of benchmarks that you're looking to hit, or certain waypoints that you're trying to hit. I've never seen this place before. Like, I'm just as happy in the first 200 feet of cave as I'm going to be 2,000 feet back.
Yep.
Like, it's all new to me anyway. Now, there was another time Nellie and I don't even remember what passage it was, but I decided that at every navigational decision we hit, we were going to go left. I don't know why I picked that. I don't remember at this point, but we got in the water and I had a bundle of reels like that. Like, we're going left a lot. And we got to the very first arrow and I kind of looked at the jump. I looked up the main line, looked at Nellie, and I was like, let's just go that way. Because I'd never been up that main line before. And there was what was up there is going to be just as exciting as what I'm going to see over there.
No, I agree completely. Isn't it funny? When I was, again, in Australia, we were doing our advanced cave crossover there with JDZ, and it was a huge amount of fun. I love the way they have a stress test. I thought that was amazing. You know, a lot of people won't like it, but for me, like, I'm happy to demonstrate my skills, and it was a good test for me, right? And I learned a lot from it too. But once we got a part of the crossover is that you eventually then go to Tank Cave, which is kind of the premier cave there, and it's superb. I absolutely loved it. But man, were they swimming fast. And we got told, listen, you guys are swimming way too slow. And I got a CO2 headache almost from it. You know, that's how hard we're working. I'm a super fit guy. So I came back and just said, you know what? I don't like swimming that fast. It's okay. You know, I can do it, but I didn't enjoy the dive. I didn't feel as if I could see what I wanted to see. And we're only going up the main line. You know, there was one T that we took from A line to C line there. And then we swam to the end of C. And I was like, come on. Like, I really wanted to see what there was there. And we had plenty of gas. So what's the hurry? And I remember coming back from that thinking, okay, this is the paradigm for advanced cave diving. You've got to swim fast. And then I'm in the water with Ed Sorensen. We're doing our first dive. And when we got out of the water, he said, have you got a date tonight or something? And I said, no, of course not. And he goes, well, what's the hurry? You know, it's kind of like, slow down, take your time. You're on a rebreather now. You know, you've got 6 hours in here if you want it, easy. And so I thought, fantastic. So we slowed down and we're cruising into the cave, swimming against the flow some of the time too. And I think, again, rebreather diving, it is important to slow down. If I was working that hard on a rebreather, that can cause you problems. So it was a nice lesson. And I think certainly for me, the way I like to dive, I do like to take my time. It doesn't mean that you want to be super slow, but it means that make sure you have a look around and don't miss things and enjoy the dive.
Absolutely. There are a lot of areas around here where moving slow is as much a conservation thing as it is just a can you enjoy your dive thing. I mean, there are some areas where you need to move through a restriction where it's not rock on the other side, but it's actually very delicate formations.
Yeah.
You asked before why I kind of found my way to Sidemount. It's because you'll occasionally get to formations that are only that far apart. Mm-hmm. Like, I can't fit through that on back mount. Mm-hmm. It's really you need to go sideways and you need to pick your way through at a snail's pace to avoid damaging anything.
Yeah.
And just the challenge of that is fun, and it's also awfully beautiful.
I love that. It's one of my favorite things about diving and overheads. And I do it in shipwrecks as well. And I kind of have a saying, you've got to move through here like a church mouse, turning on your side and then just moving forward a little bit, stopping, saying, okay, I need to make an adjustment, move again. That is actually one of my favorite things in diving.
It's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it is.
And when you move through cleanly and you look back and you're like, that's pretty cool.
Yeah, when Ed and I dived in Hole in the Wall, it was same. So I'm on the rebreather now, and I was actually so pleased with how that went because I was able to dive pretty much to my open circuit standard. But we went through some, not areas that were mega tight, but they were very narrow and very low. But the bottom was silt that went down as far as, we don't even know how far down it goes. Ed said somebody had put a sample tube in there and it went down over 10 feet. So if you even touch that or get close to it, it's going to silt out. And I had Ed behind me, so the pressure's on, right? So I'm going through and I'm making mega adjustments of my BCD and loop, and I'm very pleased. Yeah, I don't think I could have done it any better on open circuit. In fact, I know I couldn't. And so I was so pleased looking back going,
That's awesome.
I didn't mess that one up. I didn't mess that one up. Because the last thing you want to do is kick silt in Ed's face, right? So it was... It was awesome. But what fun, eh? I mean, that to me that's diving. I just love that execution.
Absolutely.
And, yeah, cool.
There's actually some areas in Florida where it can only even barely be described as silt. It's almost like pudding, where as you swim past it, you can actually see kind of contrails of ripple.
Yeah.
Like behind you through this mucky, puddingy stuff that's on the floor.
Yeah.
And when you move through an area like that, and it's still clean. I might be okay at this.
Yeah. We've got a horrible training site in Auckland in New Zealand here. It's Lake Pupuki. It's a lake that's right in the middle of a big city, right? So the lake itself is unfortunately either dead or dying. It's got some fish in it, but it's not in very good condition. So the visibility is just horrendous. It's sometimes 0, sometimes half a meter, sometimes a meter. I went and did some training there. I did a little workshop for somebody here, and then I did some training on the rebreather the next day. And the bottom there is the finest silt again. And you've got a slope that goes down as it slopes down deeper. And it is, I mean, I kid you not, even if you're finning properly and you're half a meter off the bottom, it's really easy to kick up some silt. It's a really good learning experience in there. If you're not kicking silt, you're doing really well. And it is so challenging to hold a level and not do that. I often find one spot to do some skills. You do some skills, go, oh crap, we need to move. So you have to move to another part. But if you can find those sort of sites to train in, then it can be, I think, a really good learning experience.
Oh, it's really valuable. It's actually one of the things that I'm really grateful for, kind of, again, the geology and biology of this area. As an instructor, it gives one the flexibility to do a lot of very different things.
Yeah.
You think about, all right, there's a cenote out in the middle of the jungle. Well, everything upstream of that cenote, assuming there isn't a cenote for some distance, all the silt upstream will be geological silt. It'll be broken down rock or calcite rafts or whatever, usually just white sand. Everything downstream of that cenote is going to be biological silt. So it's going to be catfish poop and seeds and broken down leaves. So if there's a bunch of stuff where I really need to keep my eye on you, we can go upstream. If I really want to prove a point about how bad visibility can get very quickly, we're going downstream.
Yeah. Yeah, very cool. And I think the other thing that you've got there as well is you've got some amazing training sites, haven't you, where you can go and check things out. You've got cenotes and easy caverns, and then, of course, just a huge variety of different cave systems.
Yeah. There's a set of caves that are commonly used as training caves.
Mm-hmm.
There are some caves that are used as training caves that probably shouldn't be. And then there are some caves that either by kind of common law, just kind of common agreement among the guides and instructors in the area, or by explicit landowner permission, are just non-training caves.
Yeah.
You cannot perform any training there. Nahoch is a great example. It's probably one of the most commonly dived caves around here for a lot of reasons. I mean, it's absolutely gorgeous being way up on the list. It's a hard, no-training cave, which I think is brilliant and important because a lot of that cave is really, really delicate. It's a place to go once you have everything squared away. It's not a place to go to learn how to square away. So there are a lot of training caves, but there are also a lot of caves that are just there to be enjoyed and dived.
Hey, a few episodes back, I had a really, really neat conversation with Philip Lehman and Vincent about Somos Los Cenotes. I think Natalie was involved as well. Tell us a bit about your perspective and what you've seen recently in terms of that initiative.
Oh, yeah. There's been a lot of development in the area. Over the last decade or so, it's really exploded. Sometimes tell people the first time I came down here, Playa was about the size that Tulum is now. Playa is now a pretty big city, and Tulum is becoming a kind of a small city or a very large town at the very least. As you drive right up and down 307, which is the main highway that runs from Cancun all the way down to Belize, every billboard is for real estate, whether it's condos or development or vacation rentals or whatever. The entire stretch from Cancun down to the border is under consideration for being developed. The town just south of Tulum is Muyil. And Muyil now is a tiny, sleepy little town that's just kind of 3 little shops and a couple little taco stands. But there's a lot of talk of development that's going to start happening down there in the very near future. It's disappointing because it is right on top of a lot of really wonderful cave systems. We're sort of lucky that the stretch of land that's been under the most development recently, and obviously most everybody wants to be out on the beach side, which brings its own ecological disaster that we don't necessarily need to talk about. As you get down closer to Muyil, you're getting into areas of mangrove. Like the whole area is basically just mangrove. It's the jungle abuts right up against mangrove, right on the highway. So to develop there, you're talking about building right on top of cave systems and having to damage a lot of the mangrove that is really important natural habitat. Somos Los Cenotes has been about trying to raise the awareness of what kind of the natural resources of that area are, how important they are, and just how fragile they are. And that's been one of the main contributions that cave divers have been in a position to make kind of since the inception of cave diving. Since somebody first said, well, where's this water coming from? Well, cave divers are in a position to go and figure out where the water is coming from. In Florida, that's been used to settle water rights disputes and land disputes. It's actually, over the last couple of years, a large contingent of the Florida cave diving community managed to, at the very least, delay, if not completely eliminate the development of huge Walmart right on top of a huge important part of the aquifer. Somos Los Cenotes is, in its way, an effort to do that in this area, to try and demonstrate, like, look, this is our water. This is where all the water comes from. Frankly, it's our drinking water. It's where all the fresh water of the area comes from. And if you upset that balance, you can be doing irreparable damage, or at least damage that isn't measured in kind of human timescales. A lot of the caves that are right underneath Tulum are not really diveable anymore. None of the caves under Playa, certainly, can be safely dived. Like, you're going to get hepatitis A if you dive in some of those caves. And Somos Los Cenotes is an effort to try and delay or eliminate that happening down in Muyil.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge, isn't it? Because you can imagine from the point of view of the locals and the landowners and so on, this is their opportunity to, make money for their families and so on.
Mm-hmm.
And, talking to Philip and Vincent and Natalie, this effort and this initiative is very much about showing them and helping them communicate the value of the aquifer and preserving it, and how there's opportunities for them in terms of other businesses that make use of i.e. cave diving in particular, or that support cave diving.
Well, and as you say, it can be incredibly hard. I mean, if a landowner is faced with the decision of, okay, well, I can protect this valuable natural resource that is, nourishing the mangrove, which filters out nitrates from the water and can protect the coral reefs and do all these really valuable, wonderful things, and make a couple pesos here and there from some cave divers. Or I can take $500,000 and just sell my property and go live like a king for the rest of my life. I personally can fault you going with decision B, but that's coming from, the fairly spoiled position of being a full-time cave instructor who own property already. I live, as comfortably as a cave instructor can live.
Exactly.
But for some of these families that are really struggling in this area, when feeding one's family is a daily concern, being faced with, well, protect local resources for future generations or feed my family. That's a crap position to be in. And it's a shame that it should be thus.
Yeah.
But it's still an important battle to be fought. It's still an important awareness to be raised.
Yeah, one of the things we focused on from my point of view as well is people visiting the region, what can they do to support this? And I think one of the things is to make sure that we're supporting local businesses. Back to the guide thing as well, we're supporting local guides, we're supporting food stalls, whatever you can do to make sure that there's a return there for the locals, I think is really important, and also being respectful of them as that as well.
Yeah, a lot of the landowners around here have, either through entrepreneurialism or through a bit of education or whatever concomitant of factors, they've figured out a way to balance that local resource with feeding their family. Dos Ojos is a perfect example of that. Nahoch is a great example of that. There are a lot of areas that are developed into a place where people can come and appreciate these resources in large enough numbers that feeding one's family is not as day-to-day a struggle. Again, I'm sure a lot of these landowners, they're not getting rich, but they're a little more comfortable. And I hope that the Somos Los Cenotes effort manages to demonstrate to a lot of these people, look, there are other ways that you can access this resource to your advantage. I'm sort of loath to use the word exploit the resource, but in a way that is what it is. What's been really nice to see is the landowners like the folks at Dos Ojos, a lot of the caves around here that have set up zip lines and Mayan tea ceremonies and things in their caves. It all seems a little gotsy and a little touristy to me, but for people who are coming to the area, if that's their cup of tea, that's awesome. Go and enjoy this resource. Go and see what's under the Yucatan Peninsula. I mean, cave diving isn't for everybody. Zip lines aren't for me. Whatever. It takes all types, right?
Yeah.
So I really am glad to see that there are a lot of landowners around here that have figured out a way to balance, protect the resource with income, and responsibly as well. A lot of the places that you see around here, you'll see, please, no suntan lotion, no insect repellent. And they get really strict about if they see you putting on suntan lotion in the parking lot. Like, wear a hat instead. Because various chemicals getting into the water supply.
Yeah. Well, Roger, it's been really great to catch up and meet you, and I've appreciated your perspectives and love your blog and Facebook posts, so please keep them coming. And I think it's great to see somebody who's passionate about dive safety, passionate about doing things right, and the importance of focusing on things that make you a better diver. And your website is shockha.com.
Shockha.com. It's hyphenated.
Yeah.
For
and
those of you who don't know Mayan, it's XOC.
I'll put a link in the podcast notes anyhow, so if you want to go and check that out. So again, thanks very much. Great to meet you. I hope we catch up sometime.
Thank you very much for asking me to be on. It's been a real pleasure. Again, it's been kind of wonderful watching the compendium of folks that you've had on your podcast. Again, it's a lot of really interesting experience, a lot of really interesting people.
Oh, you're welcome.
Take care.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that episode as much as I did making it. It was awesome to meet and catch up with Roger and get some of his perspectives. I particularly enjoyed the parts on how we all can become better and safer divers. If you want to know more about the fundamentals of sidemount diving, look out for my book, Sidemount Fundamentals. It's available through my website, www.sidemountpros.com, in the store. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode. You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.